For 8 years, I poured my soul into our life together. Then, on our anniversary, she handed me divorce papers, calling me a failure. "It's not about the money anymore," she said coldly. She didn't know I was about to become a millionaire. She just knew she had a backup plan. It's funny how a life can be built on a foundation you believe to be solid granite, only to discover it was just a thin layer of ice over a deep, cold ocean. For 8 years, my foundation was Sarah. My life was Sarah, and I thought our love was the granite. We had a house in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, the one with the slate-gray siding and the burgeoning rose bushes she loved so much. We had the 2 cars, the matching his and hers coffee mugs, the shared Netflix queue. We had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a retirement dream that involved a small cottage near the coast in North Carolina. It was a life built from a catalog of the American dream, and I was proud of it. I was proud of being the man who could provide it. My name is Liam. I'm 38, and for the longest time, my entire identity was wrapped up in being a good husband to Sarah. Looking back now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, the signs were always there like tiny cracks in a porcelain doll that you refused to see. I remember once, years ago, our friends Mark and Jenny were going through a messy divorce. When I told Sarah, her first question wasn't, "Is Jenny okay?" or "What happened?" It was, "Is she going to get to keep the house?" I'd brushed it off at the time, telling myself she was just being practical. That was Sarah, always practical. She was the polished, driven one, the one who knew the names of all the top real estate agents and the best interest rates for a savings account. I admired that. I saw it as ambition, as a desire to build a secure future for us. I didn't see it as the desperate need for a safety net that it truly was. My flaw wasn't just trust, it was a kind of willful blindness. I chose not to see the parts of Sarah that didn't fit into the perfect picture I'd created in my mind. The way her smile would tighten almost imperceptibly when our neighbors bought a new BMW. She'd say, "Good for them," but her eyes would be cold, and I knew she'd spend the next hour scrolling through luxury car websites on her tablet, the screen's glow illuminating a discontented frown. Confronting those moments felt messy. It felt like an accusation, and it was easier to tell myself I was imagining things than to face the possibility that the woman I loved valued a German automobile more than our neighbor's happiness. The first tremor that was too strong to ignore came on a gray Tuesday in October. The tech firm I'd worked at for 12 years, the place I'd started at in the mailroom and worked my way up to mid-level management, had been bought out by a massive, faceless corporation. We were all called into a sterile conference room that smelled of stale coffee and fear. The corporate executioner, a man with a smile as artificial as the plant in the corner, gave us an opportunity. We could either stay on with a 20% pay cut and significantly reduced responsibilities, or we could take a severance package and walk away. The message was clear. They wanted us gone. I came home that night, my stomach in a cold, tight knot. I loved my job. I loved the team I'd built, the challenges, the sense of accomplishment. I told Sarah over the dinner she'd made, a chicken piccata that suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I expected a hand on my arm, a supportive, "We'll figure this out, honey." Instead, she put her fork down with a sharp click against the plate. 20%, she said, her voice sharp. 20%, Liam? What about the plan? Our 5-year plan is based on our combined income growing, not shrinking. What will our friends think if we have to sell one of the cars? It's not about what they think, Sarah, I said, my own frustration rising. It's about my career. I like it there. You liked it there, she corrected, her voice laced with an unfamiliar condescension. The job you liked is gone. This is a demotion. A real man would look for something better, not settle for less. The word stung. So my worth as a man is tied to my salary? She looked at me, her face a mask of wounded innocence. You're being overly sensitive, Liam, she said, her tone softening into a manipulative caress. I'm worried about us, about our future, and you're turning this into a personal attack on me. And just like that, I was the bad guy. I was the one being unreasonable. I spent the rest of the dinner apologizing, trying to smooth over the cracks she had just violently ripped open. She went to stay at her sister's for 2 days to get some space. When she came back, she was distant. The air in our home, once warm and comfortable, was now thin and cold. A permanent chill had set in. Against her silent, simmering disapproval, I took the pay cut. I was stubborn. I thought I could prove to her that we'd be fine, that our love was stronger than a line item on a budget. I was wrong. My decision became a constant, unspoken accusation in our home. She started leaving articles about high-paying executive jobs open on the kitchen counter. At dinner parties, she'd make little jokes about having to be the primary breadwinner now, jokes that made our friends chuckle awkwardly while I felt my face burn with humiliation. It was around this time she started mentioning Derek. He was a dentist at her practice, apparently new in town. It was innocent at first. Derek was saying the new steakhouse downtown is overrated. Derek has this hilarious story about a patient. His name started punctuating her sentences, a constant reminder of a life she had outside of me, a life that, it seemed, was more interesting. I was so focused on trying to fix the us that I didn't register him as a threat. He was just a name, a phantom in her anecdotes. I was trying to repair the foundation of our marriage, completely unaware that she was already scouting locations for a new one. The house grew quieter. Our conversations became purely logistical. Did you take out the trash? I'll be home late tonight. Have a work dinner. The easy intimacy we once shared had evaporated, replaced by a polite, strained silence. We were living like roommates who resented each other, passing in the hallway with averted eyes. The roses outside were blooming, but inside our home, everything was starting to wither and die. And in my willful blindness, I kept watering the dead plants, hoping they'd somehow spring back to life. The 6 months that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression and emotional erosion. The chill in our house became a permanent frost. Sarah moved through our shared spaces like a ghost with a grievance, her silence more damning than any argument. It was in that cold, lonely environment that a seed of an idea began to sprout in my mind. It was an act of survival, a quiet rebellion. I had years of experience in project management and logistics. I knew there were smaller companies, the ones our old firm had deemed not lucrative enough, that were desperate for the kind of expertise I could offer. So, I started to build something of my own. It became my secret. Late at night, after Sarah was asleep, I'd creep downstairs to my office, the glow of the laptop my only companion. I spent weekends in coffee shops, nursing a single cup for hours, my head buried in market research and business plans. That little consulting business became my psychological safe space, the one place I could build something without it being judged, dismantled, or measured against Sarah's 5-year plan. Hiding it felt wrong, a betrayal in its own right, but the thought of her dismissing it with one of her tight, condescending smiles felt infinitely worse. Slowly, incredibly, it started to work. An old colleague passed my name along. A former client, frustrated with the new corporate bureaucracy, reached out. After 2 months of clandestine work, I had 3 solid contracts in hand. They weren't huge, but they were real. They were proof. The income from them would more than erase the 20% pay cut. It was the solution. I was ecstatic. I felt like I was holding the key that would unlock our happiness again, that would thaw the frost between us. I came home one evening, the signed contracts feeling heavy and significant in my briefcase. I found Sarah in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. I couldn't contain my excitement. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," I started, my voice buoyant with hope. I laid it all out on the kitchen island, the business plan, the research, and finally, the 3 signed contracts. I expected her to be shocked, then proud, then maybe even to wrap her arms around me in a way she hadn't in months. She looked down at the papers, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me, and there was no pride in her eyes. There was only a cold, hard fury. "You did all this behind my back?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to show you that I could fix things," I pleaded. "Fix things?" she exploded, her voice rising with each word. "You call this fixing things? You made a massive financial decision, started a whole business, without consulting me. You gambled our future on a whim. How can I ever trust you? This isn't about the money, Liam. It's about the fact that you are reckless and selfish." The fight was the worst we'd ever had. It was ugly and raw. Her accusations of recklessness were so baffling, so disconnected from the careful, meticulous work I had poured into this, that I could barely respond. In the end, I was left standing in the kitchen, the contracts feeling foolish and flimsy in my hand, the silence of her renewed anger ringing in my ears. A week later, she suggested we go out for our 8th anniversary. She picked the place, an expensive Italian restaurant downtown called Isabella's, the same place I had proposed to her all those years ago. A flicker of hope, stubborn and foolish, ignited in me. Maybe this was an olive branch. Maybe she'd had time to think and was ready to see what I had accomplished. She dressed up. She wore the blue dress I loved, did her hair, and put on the perfume that always reminded me of our honeymoon in Italy. She seemed calm, cheerful, even. We talked about neutral things over wine and calamari. Her work, her sister's new baby, a movie she'd seen. It felt almost normal. I let myself relax, let myself remember the woman I had fallen in love with, the one whose laughter could fill a room. I started to believe we were going to be okay. After the main course, as the waiter cleared our plates, she reached into her purse. "I have something for you," she said, her voice even. She slid a thick, manila envelope across the polished wood table. It landed softly between our wine glasses. My heart genuinely skipped a beat. Maybe it was tickets for a trip? A sappy, heartfelt card? I smiled, a real, hopeful smile. "You didn't have to," I said, reaching for it. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the flap. I pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. The top page had a header in a severe, blocky font. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." My name was already typed in. The sounds of the restaurant, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing over the speakers, all dissolved into a dull, distant roar. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked up at her, my mind unable to form a question. She was just watching me, a strange, serene smile on her face. It was the same smile she'd had when our neighbors got their BMW. Detached, victorious. My voice was a raw whisper. "Sarah, what is this?" "I thought it would be poetic," she said, taking a delicate sip of her wine. Her calmness was the cruelest part. It was a performance, and she was enjoying it. "This is where we started, and this is where we end. It's not about the money anymore, Liam. It's about trust, and I just don't trust your judgment." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman in the blue dress with the executioner sitting before me. The hope I'd carried just moments before curdled into something ugly and painful in my chest. I felt like a fool, a complete and utter fool. Why here? On our anniversary? I managed to choke out. "I wanted you to understand how serious I am," she said simply, as if discussing the weather. I don't remember much after that. I think the waiter came by and asked about dessert. I remember staring at him blankly, unable to comprehend his question. I vaguely recall throwing some cash on the table, far more than the bill, and walking out, leaving her there with her wine and her victory. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, the engine off, the streetlights blurring through my tear-filled eyes. When I finally drove home, the house was dark, but her car was in the driveway. I walked in to find her in our bedroom, a suitcase open on the bed. She was folding her clothes with a calm, practiced efficiency. "I'll be staying at my sister's for a while," she said without looking at me. "My lawyer will be in touch." I stood in the doorway, watching the life we had built being neatly folded and packed away. In that moment, I hit the bottom. The man I thought I was, the good husband, the provider, the problem solver, had been a figment of my imagination. I looked in a mirror on the closet door, and a stranger looked back at me. He wasn't Liam, husband to Sarah, anymore. So who was he? In one evening, with a manila envelope and a few cold words, she had erased my entire identity. And I had let her. The first week after Sarah left was a blur of hollow days and long, silent nights. The house felt cavernous, every footstep echoing in the emptiness she'd left behind. I was functioning on autopilot, consumed by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I'd lost my wife, my marriage, my identity. I was adrift. Then, the email landed in my inbox. It was from a regional manufacturing company, one I had sent a speculative proposal to weeks earlier. They were impressed. They wanted to hire me for a massive 6-month logistics overhaul. The contract was worth more than I used to make in a year at my old job. Staring at the numbers on the screen, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It wasn't happiness either. It was a strange, disorienting sense of irony. My business, the one that had been the final nail in my marriage's coffin, was suddenly a staggering success. In a moment of weakness I would later regret and be grateful for in equal measure, I called her. I don't know what I wanted. Maybe I wanted her to see she'd made a mistake. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice. I told her about the contract, my voice flat and factual. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Then her voice came, but it was different. The cold, sharp edges were gone, replaced by a soft, tentative warmth I hadn't heard in over a year. "Oh, Liam, wow. That's incredible," she breathed. "Listen, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I think I was too hasty. I think I made a mistake. Can we please talk?" As she spoke, a memory flashed in my mind, vivid and jarring. I saw her face at the restaurant, that cold, serene smile as she watched me break. And then I heard her current voice, this new, sweet, pleading tone. The two images didn't just fail to connect. They repelled each other like opposing magnets. For the first time, my anger became sharper than my grief. A cold, hard suspicion began to form in the pit of my stomach. "I need to go," I said, and hung up before she could reply. That night, my sister Chloe called. "Don't you dare fall for it, Liam," she said, her voice fierce. "She doesn't miss you. She misses your wallet. Protect yourself. Find out what's really been going on." Her words solidified my newfound resolve. It was time to stop being a victim. It was time to find the truth. I started where any modern investigation begins, digitally. I logged into our shared phone plan account. Her call history was unremarkable, but the data usage for text messages to one number was astronomical. The number belonged to Derek. I scrolled back. The constant stream of text didn't start a few months ago. It started the week after I took the pay cut. Next, the credit card statements. I went through them line by line. There were dinners for two at restaurants I'd never been to. Movie tickets on nights she told me she was working late. And then I saw it. A charge from 4 months ago. The Lakeside Inn, a boutique hotel an hour out of town. The charge was from a weekend she'd told me she was at a dental conference in the city. The sickness in my stomach intensified. This wasn't a recent fling born of loneliness. This was a calculated, long-term affair. This was a conspiracy. I drove to the address I had for Derek's dental practice, but a sign on the door indicated he'd moved to a new, larger office. A quick search online gave me the address of a new, upscale apartment complex across town. A place far too expensive for a single dentist new to the area. I drove there, my heart pounding a frantic, angry rhythm against my ribs. And there it was, parked in a spot marked reserved. Sarah's white SUV. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening certainty. She wasn't staying with her sister. She had moved in with him. I walked up to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 3B. The door opened, and there he was. Derek. He was taller than I'd imagined, with a practiced, easy smile that faltered the second he saw me. Panic flashed in his eyes. "Can I help you?" he stammered. I pushed past him into the apartment, and there was Sarah, sitting on a sleek, modern sofa in a silk bathrobe, a coffee mug in her hands. The look on her face, shock followed by fear, followed by anger, was something I would never forget. "Liam, what are you doing here?" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "I live here now," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I looked around the apartment. Or at least, it looks like my money does. The confrontation was ugly. Her lies crumbled one by one as I laid out the evidence. The text, the hotel, her car, and his parking spot. She tried to deny, to deflect, to cry. But the truth was a corner she couldn't escape. Derek, the brave new man, just stood there, wringing his hands and telling me to leave. He was a coward. I had seen all I needed to see. I hired a divorce lawyer the next day. Her name was Ms. Davis, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being a shark. I told her everything. She listened patiently, then gave me a grim nod. "Infidelity helps," But what we really need is financial proof, she said. Let's start discovery. 2 weeks later, she called me into her office. She had a stack of papers on her desk. Liam, they were smarter than I thought, she said, her voice serious. She pointed to a series of bank statements from our joint marital account. Look here. Every 2 weeks for the past 4 months. A transfer of $500. Small enough to go unnoticed in the daily flow of bills and expenses. A death by 1,000 cuts. She then slid another statement across the desk. It was from a different bank. A savings account. The account holders were Sarah Miller and Derek Colby. The deposits perfectly matched the withdrawals from my account. Over $20,000, siphoned away while she was telling me I was financially irresponsible. It was breathtaking in its hypocrisy. It was premeditated, systematic theft. It was the decisive evidence. The climax came not in a screaming match, but in the sterile, beige conference room of a mediation office. Sarah was there with her lawyer, looking confident. They were demanding half of my business, arguing that her emotional support during our marriage had contributed to its conception. Ms. Davis let them finish their entire opening demand. Then, she calmly placed the 2 sets of bank statements on the table. She laid out the timeline, her voice clear and precise. The affair that started the moment my income dropped. The secret apartment. And finally, the fraudulent transfers from the marital account to the undeclared, secret account she shared with her lover. I watched the color drain from Sarah's face. Her lawyer, a smug man in a shiny suit, was stunned into silence, shuffling through the papers with a dawning look of horror. The power in a room had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. I looked at Sarah, the woman who had shattered my world. I had expected to feel a surge of vengeful triumph. But I didn't. I just felt a strange, quiet peace. The victory wasn't in the money. It was in the truth, finally dragged out into the light. I leaned forward, my voice steady and clear, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. You said it wasn't about the money. I looked directly into her eyes. You were right. For me, it was never about the money. It was about respect, something you clearly know nothing about. Her mask of composure finally shattered. She looked down at the table, utterly and completely defeated. The game was over. I had won. The fallout from that mediation was swift and decisive. With undeniable proof of financial fraud and long-term infidelity, Sarah's claim to my business evaporated. The law, at least in our state, doesn't look kindly on a spouse who systematically steals marital assets while planning her exit. Her lawyer, seeing his massive payday disappear, quickly advised her to settle. The final agreement was overwhelmingly in my favor. My business, which had grown even more successful in the intervening months, was declared my sole and separate property. The funds she had siphoned into her secret account were to be paid back to me from her share of the equity in our house. After everything was settled, she would walk away with very little. She had gambled on my failure and then on my success, and had lost spectacularly on both counts. The poetic justice didn't end there. About a month after the mediation, I heard through Mark, my old friend who now worked with me, that Derek had kicked her out. Mark's cousin worked at the same dental practice. The office gossip was that Derek, terrified of being dragged into a messy legal battle and being financially responsible for a woman he now saw as too much drama, had ended things abruptly. He was in it for the thrill of a secret affair, not the reality of a complicated life. Sarah had burned her bridge with me, and her escape raft had just sunk. She was completely, utterly alone. I was in my new office one afternoon, looking out the window at the bustling city below when my receptionist buzzed. Liam, Sarah Miller is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. My first instinct was to say no, but curiosity and a desire for final closure won out. I told them to send her in. The woman who walked in my office was a stranger. The polished, confident Sarah was gone. In her place was a woman who looked tired and broken. Her clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. She started crying before she even spoke, a torrent of apologies, regrets, and self-pity. She'd made the biggest mistake of her life. She loved me. She'd been scared and confused. Derek was a nobody, a mistake. She would do anything, anything to have her old life back. I listened silently, letting her exhaust her reservoir of rehearsed pleas. When she finally fell silent, sniffing and looking at me with pleading eyes, I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt had scarred over. Even the pity was faint. I was looking at a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. "I'm sorry you're in pain, Sarah," I said, and the strange thing was I meant it. My voice was calm and detached. "But the man you were married to, the man who would have forgiven you for anything, he doesn't exist anymore. You made sure of that." She started to protest, to beg again, but I stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, walking to the door and holding it open. "I truly do, because I've already found what I was looking for, my peace." She looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her tear-filled eyes. She saw that the door wasn't just open for her to leave my office. It was a door to a life she could never re-enter. She walked out without another word. I closed the door behind her, not with a slam, but with a soft, final click. The sound of freedom. That weekend, I had a barbecue in the backyard of my new house, a smaller place closer to the city that was all my own. Chloe was there, her husband, and their new baby. Mark was at the grill, arguing playfully with my sister about the right way to cook a burger. We were drinking cheap beer, laughing loudly, and celebrating nothing in particular other than a beautiful Saturday afternoon. As I looked at their happy, familiar faces, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I had a moment of profound insight. I finally understood Sarah, not in a way that excused her, but in a way that liberated me. She wasn't an evil person born to betray. She was a person trapped and defined by her deepest fears, a fear of being poor, of being irrelevant, of not keeping up. That fear had poisoned her, making her value security over love and appearances over authenticity. It made her cruel. Understanding that didn't mean forgiving her. It meant her actions were no longer a reflection of my worth, but a symptom of her own brokenness. And understanding that was the final key to my own prison. My real family was right here, in this backyard, laughing over a burnt burger. My wealth wasn't in my booming business bank account. It was in this easy, unconditional love. It was in the peace I felt in my own chest, a quiet strength that no one could ever take from me again. They say living well is the best revenge, but I found that simply living in your own truth is the greatest freedom. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to finally gain everything I actually needed. My life isn't perfect now, but it's real. It's mine. So I leave you with this. What lie are you telling yourself for the sake of a quiet life? And what truth is waiting right there under the surface, ready to set you free?